It was a bright Saturday morning, and the city streets were alive with activity. People were walking to work, others were running errands, and the sound of car horns mixed with the chatter of strangers. The sun shone gently, reflecting off the glass windows of stores and cafes. On one of these busy streets, a man was walking calmly, taking his time to enjoy the morning. He wore a simple shirt and jeans, carrying a small bag over his shoulder. There was something steady about his pace, a rhythm that showed he was used to moving through crowded places without letting chaos touch him. As he passed a small cafe, the smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the air. He paused for a moment, letting himself enjoy it, then moved on. The street was crowded, but he didn't mind. He had learned long ago how to navigate busy places without letting himself get rattled. He noticed people rushing, some frustrated, others laughing with friends. Children ran around, their parents trying to keep up. Street vendors called out, offering everything from fruits to newspapers. The city had its usual mix of noise and energy, but it was a place the man felt comfortable in. Suddenly, his calm morning was interrupted. A woman, walking quickly toward him from the opposite direction, bumped into him forcefully. She was tall, with sharp features and a look of anger in her eyes. She didn't apologize. Instead, she stopped in front of him and stared. Her voice was sharp and filled with irritation when she spoke. She began insulting him with words he had heard before, words meant to provoke and humiliate. He had faced prejudice many times in his life, but he was not easily shaken. He looked at her, calm, and tried to keep his voice gentle. "Please, there's no need for this," he said. "I don't want any trouble." The woman's eyes narrowed and she scoffed. "Trouble? You shouldn't even be here," she spat, her tone full of contempt. Passers-by began to notice the confrontation, glancing curiously but hesitating to step in. There was something in her posture that demanded attention, yet the man's calm demeanor stood in contrast. He didn't flinch or raise his voice. He simply stood there, looking at her with quiet resolve. The woman took a step closer, her face red with anger. She started yelling, her words becoming more aggressive. She made gestures with her hands, pointing at him as if to accuse him of something. People on the street began to slow down, watching the scene unfold. Some whispered to each other, unsure of whether to intervene. Others took out their phones, ready to record. The tension in the air was palpable. He realized that reasoning with her might not work. She was not here for conversation. She was here to provoke a reaction. He took a deep breath, remembering all the times he had faced similar situations. He remembered his father's advice: stay calm, stay strong, and never let anger make your decisions for you. That thought helped him steady his mind. He didn't want to escalate the situation, but he also refused to be humiliated. The woman suddenly swung her hand, hitting him across the chest. The impact was sharp, enough to make him stumble slightly. People gasped and took a step back. The man's eyes widened for a brief moment in surprise, but his body didn't react violently. He steadied himself, placing a hand on his chest where she had struck him. He could feel his heartbeat racing, but he kept his voice calm. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. His words were measured, almost gentle, but firm. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was asking her to stop because he wanted no part in the hatred she was showing. The woman was shocked by his calmness. She expected fear, maybe anger, but not this quiet composure. Her face twisted in confusion, and for a moment she didn't know how to react. But then her anger flared again, and she raised her hand, ready to hit him once more. People around them started murmuring. Some shouted at her to stop. Others tried to step closer but hesitated. No one wanted to get hurt, but everyone could feel the tension building. The man took a small step back, not to run, but to create space. He wanted her to understand that her actions would not control him. "You can't hurt me with your anger," he said, his voice steady. "I will not fight you, but I will not let you humiliate me either." The woman froze for a moment. The words hit her in a way she did not expect. She had assumed that her aggression would intimidate him, make him submit or react in fear. But here he was, standing strong, calm, and composed. Her confusion turned into frustration, and she lunged again, this time more aggressively. This time, he reacted instinctively. He didn't strike her, but he blocked her hand and stepped aside, using her momentum to keep himself safe. The movement was quick and precise, showing that he knew how to handle himself without resorting to unnecessary violence. Bystanders gasped at his skill and control. Some whispered to each other. Realizing that this was no ordinary confrontation, the woman stumbled slightly, her shock evident. She had underestimated him. She opened her mouth to yell, but no words came out. The man's calm eyes met hers, showing strength and resolve. He wasn't looking to fight. He was looking to protect himself and to make it clear that her actions were unacceptable. People began taking sides. Some whispered in admiration of his composure. Others expressed anger at the woman's behavior. A few tried to reason with her, telling her to calm down. She ignored them, still consumed by her anger, but the man remained steady. Unshaken by the chaos around him, the street felt tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. Children stopped playing nearby, sensing that something serious was happening. Vendors paused their calls. Even the sounds of traffic seemed distant as everyone watched the confrontation unfold. He took another deep breath, thinking quickly about what to do next. He didn't want the situation to escalate into a fight that could lead to serious injury or legal trouble. He decided to speak again, using words to assert his dignity rather than force. "I am not your enemy," he said clearly, his voice rising just enough to be heard over the murmurs of the crowd. "I don't deserve this, and you need to stop." For a brief moment, the woman wavered. She blinked, clearly trying to understand why he wasn't reacting the way she expected. Her anger was still there, but confusion mixed with it. She took a step back, almost involuntarily, as if realizing for the first time that her aggression had no effect on him. The man's composure had an effect not just on her, but on the people around. Some of the bystanders began speaking up, telling her to leave him alone. One man in a nearby shop even came out to stand a few feet away, showing that she was not in control. Her power over the situation was slipping. She looked around, noticing that people were not supporting her as she expected. Their disapproval was clear in their eyes. Her anger faltered, and she looked back at the man, seeing him standing tall, calm, and in control. For a moment, there was silence between them, a silent recognition that the confrontation had shifted. The man felt a mix of emotions: anger at being struck, relief that he hadn't lost control, and a quiet satisfaction that he had shown strength without violence. He knew that the woman's behavior came from ignorance and fear, but he refused to stoop to her level. His calmness was his power. She took one last step toward him, but then paused. Something in her expression suggested that she realized she had miscalculated. She muttered something under her breath and turned away, storming off down the street. The people watching slowly relaxed, their tension easing as the immediate danger passed. The man remained where he was for a moment, catching his breath and adjusting his bag. His body was steady, but his mind was still processing what had just happened. He glanced around, noticing the reactions of the people nearby. Some looked at him with admiration, some with curiosity, and a few simply shook their heads at what had just occurred. He smiled faintly to himself. It had been a tense morning, but he had handled it with dignity. He continued walking down the street, blending once again into the busy city life. People returned to their routines, but for some, the encounter would stay in their minds. They had witnessed a man who had faced aggression and hatred and had responded with calmness, strength, and integrity. For him, it was just another day. But for the woman and the witnesses, it was a moment that would not be forgotten. The man's quiet courage had spoken louder than any words, proving that strength is not always measured by how hard you hit, but by how firmly you stand in the face of hatred. The man walked down the street, his steps steady but slower now, as if savoring the calm that followed the storm. The city was alive around him, but he could feel a shift in the air. People were looking at him differently, some with admiration, others with curiosity. Whispers followed him as he moved, not aggressive whispers, but soft murmurings that suggested the encounter had left an impression. He kept his eyes forward, focusing on the path ahead, but he couldn't help noticing the lingering stares. He passed by a small park where children were playing. Some of them paused to watch him, sensing the weight of the moment he had just been through. Their parents were nearby, some speaking quietly to the kids, others observing him with a mixture of caution and intrigue. The man realized that even brief encounters like the one on the street could ripple through the lives of strangers. The way one person chose to respond could leave an impression far larger than a single moment. Meanwhile, the woman who had attacked him was walking away, her anger now mixed with confusion and shame. She muttered to herself, trying to justify her behavior, even as she knew deep down it had been wrong. She had expected fear, perhaps submission, but the man's calm and measured response had shaken her. For the first time, she felt a pang of doubt about her actions. She looked around at the people who had witnessed the incident, realizing that their judgment was not in her favor. This awareness only heightened her frustration, but it also planted a seed of reflection she could not ignore. Back on the street, the man reached a quiet corner where fewer people were walking. He paused for a moment, leaning against a lamppost. His thoughts drifted to what had just happened. He thought about the anger he had felt when she hit him, the surprise at her aggression, the decision he had made to respond with calmness instead of force. He understood that strength was not measured by retaliation but by restraint, by the ability to maintain dignity in the face of hostility. As he stood there, a few passers-by approached him, asking if he was okay. They were concerned, not just for his physical well-being, but also for the emotional weight of the encounter. The man thanked them quietly, nodding, and reassured them that he was fine. He could see that some of them were inspired by the way he had handled the situation, and he felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that his actions had an impact beyond himself. News of the incident began to spread through the neighborhood. People who had witnessed it told their friends, and soon the story reached social media. Videos and photos taken by bystanders circulated online. The man's calm, measured response and the woman's shocked reaction quickly drew attention. Comments poured in, with people praising his courage and criticizing her aggression. The incident became more than a street confrontation. It became a symbol of standing up to prejudice and maintaining one's dignity. The man himself did not seek attention. He had no desire for recognition or fame. For him, it was simply a matter of doing what was right in the moment. But as the story spread, he began to notice a subtle change in the way people treated him. Some offered him smiles of respect, others nodded in acknowledgement when he passed by. Even strangers seemed to understand that he had faced something difficult and had responded with strength and grace. The woman, on the other hand, faced a very different response. She was met with anger and criticism both online and in person. People discussed the incident in groups and forums, expressing disbelief that someone would behave as she had. She received messages warning her of the consequences of her actions. And even those who did not know her personally seemed to judge her harshly. For the first time, she realized that actions fueled by hatred and ignorance could not be hidden or excused. The world was watching and judgment was swift. Despite the attention, the man continued his day as usual. He went to a nearby cafe to get a cup of coffee and sat at a small table by the window. From there, he could watch the street, observing life moving on as it always did. People came and went, children laughed, and vendors called out. Life had a way of continuing, regardless of the moments of conflict that interrupted it. Yet even in this normalcy, the memory of the confrontation lingered. He thought about how icily hatred could erupt, how fragile civility could be, and how important it was to respond with composure and principle. At the cafe, a few people recognized him from the video circulating online. Some approached him quietly, expressing admiration for his restraint and courage. They spoke about how the incident had made them reflect on their own reactions to aggression and prejudice. The man listened, nodding politely, offering words of encouragement. He did not dwell on his own role as the center of attention. Instead, he focused on the larger lesson, that standing up for oneself with dignity could inspire others to act with integrity. Later, he walked through a quieter part of the city, reflecting on the woman's behavior. He realized that her aggression was rooted in fear and ignorance, not just personal anger. People often lash out when they feel threatened or insecure, and racism, in many ways, is a manifestation of that fear. He understood that her actions were not entirely about him. They were about her own struggles and insecurities projected onto someone she perceived as different. This understanding did not excuse her behavior, but it allowed him to process the incident without hatred in his own heart. He passed by a small park again, this time noticing a group of teenagers practicing basketball. They paused to watch him as he walked by, curious about the calm confidence he carried. Some of them whispered to each other, clearly having seen the video or heard the story. He offered a small nod and a smile, acknowledging them without words. In that brief exchange, he realized that actions could teach lessons more effectively than lectures. By maintaining calm and composure, it set an example that even the youngest observers could learn from. Meanwhile, the woman's confusion grew. She had expected her aggression to assert control, to prove her dominance in some way. Instead, she felt powerless in the face of his calm strength. She replayed the encounter in her mind, trying to rationalize her actions. But she could not escape the realization that she had been wrong. The anger that had fueled her initial attack was giving way to shame and self-doubt. For the first time, she was forced to confront her own behavior and the consequences that came with it. The man continued walking, eventually reaching a quiet street lined with small shops and apartments. Here, the noise of the city faded slightly, leaving space for reflection. He thought about the power of choice, the choice to respond with anger or with composure, to escalate a situation or to diffuse it. He had chosen the latter, and in doing so, had preserved his dignity and set a standard for those around him. It was a reminder that true strength was often quiet, measured, and thoughtful. As the day went on, he noticed people talking to each other, pointing subtly in his direction. Some smiled, some nodded, and some simply observed. It was clear that the incident had left a mark on the community, sparking conversation about respect, courage, and accountability. He did not seek recognition, but he understood that his actions had a ripple effect. What began as a personal confrontation had grown into a public lesson on how to stand with integrity in the face of hostility. In the evening, he returned to his apartment, still reflecting on the events of the day. He thought about the woman and her choices, the bystanders and their reactions, and the broader implications of such encounters in society. He realized that moments like these were both challenging and revealing. They tested patience, courage, and self-control, and they revealed the character of everyone involved. For him, it had been a moment to reaffirm his principles, to act with dignity, and to maintain calm in the face of chaos. He sat by the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. Life continued around him, full of people with their own struggles, fears, and hopes. He felt a quiet sense of peace, knowing that he had faced aggression without losing himself. The woman's anger, the public attention, the whispers of the crowd, they were all temporary. What remained was his integrity, his composure, and the understanding that strength could be measured in the quiet moments as much as in the dramatic ones. And in that moment, he realized that he had not only protected himself from harm, but had also sent a message to the world. Hatred and aggression could be met with calm, courage, and dignity. One person's choice to respond with strength rather than violence could inspire others to do the same. The city continued to move around him, but for those who had witnessed the encounter, the lesson lingered long after the moment had passed, the morning after the incident. The city seemed to hum with a quiet tension. People who had seen the confrontation on the street or online were still talking about it, their voices carrying curiosity, admiration, and disbelief. The black man walked through the streets again, moving with the same steady calm as before, but he noticed the way people now looked at him. Some gave him polite nods, others smiled subtly, as if to show they recognized the courage he had displayed. A few whispered to each other when they thought he wouldn't hear. Discussing the video that had circulated overnight, he went to the local cafe he often visited. Ordering a simple coffee and sitting at his usual spot by the window, as he sipped, he watched the world go by outside. Children played on the sidewalks, vendors called out to potential customers, and cars honked from the busy intersections. The normal rhythm of the city continued, but beneath it, there was a tension that had not existed before. People were thinking about the confrontation, about the moment of aggression and the man's calm response. He noticed a group of young men standing near the entrance, whispering to each other. One of them finally gathered the courage to approach him. "Hey, I saw what happened yesterday," he said nervously. "I just wanted to say, you handled it really well." "I don't think I could have stayed that calm." The man nodded, smiling faintly. "Thank you," he said. "It wasn't easy, but losing your temper doesn't solve anything. Staying calm shows who you really are." The young man looked thoughtful, glancing around as if to see whether anyone else was listening. "Yeah, it's just seeing her hit you like that, I don't know. I think a lot of people would have reacted differently." "I understand," the man said gently. "It's human to feel anger, fear, or frustration. The choice is what we do with it. You can let it control you, or you can control it." As the young man walked away, nodding slowly, the man turned his attention back to the street. He saw people recording videos on their phones, some replaying the footage from yesterday, others talking animatedly to friends. The incident had spread quickly, and he realized that what had seemed like a brief, intense moment had now taken on a life of its own. Meanwhile, the woman who had attacked him was facing her own consequences. She had returned home after storming. Off the street, her anger now mixed with a sense of fear and shame. She found herself unable to focus on anything else, replaying the confrontation in her mind. Each time she thought about it, she felt a growing awareness that she had misjudged the situation. She had assumed that aggression would give her power, but the man's calm strength had taken it away. Her phone buzzed with messages. Notifications from social media platforms where the video of the incident was already trending. People she didn't know were commenting, criticizing her behavior, and discussing her actions. Some comments were harsh, others were blunt, but they all made the same point. Her behavior was unacceptable. She had underestimated the man she had attacked. The realization weighed on her heavily. Back at the cafe, the man finished his coffee and decided to walk through a quieter neighborhood, wanting to think without distractions. He passed by small shops and quiet streets, observing the city from a more personal perspective. He thought about the bystanders who had witnessed the confrontation and how their perceptions of courage, anger, and justice might have been shaped by what they saw. Some had been inspired, others confused, and a few had likely been angry at him for responding rather than retreating. He understood that human reactions are varied, and the same event could mean different things to different people. He reached a small park and sat on a bench. Watching children play and listening to the chatter of families nearby, he reflected on the broader implications of the incident. It wasn't just about one woman and one man on a street corner. It was about how society responds to aggression, how people treat one another, and the ways in which prejudice and fear can manifest. He thought about how easy it is for people to let anger control them, and how rare it is to see someone respond with calm dignity. While he was lost in thought, a woman approached him cautiously. She had been nearby during the incident yesterday and wanted to speak to him. "I just wanted to say, you really handled that situation well," she said, her voice soft. "Was so shocked when she hit you, and I honestly didn't know what to do. Watching you stay calm was impressive." The man nodded politely. "Thank you," he said. "It's never easy to stay calm when someone is aggressive, but reacting with anger often makes things worse. I just tried to protect myself and stay composed." She smiled slightly, her expression thoughtful. "It really makes you think about how we deal with conflict, doesn't it? Sometimes we see aggression and assume we need to respond the same way, but maybe there's another option." "Exactly," the man said. "What we do in those moments defines us more than the aggression itself. Choosing calm over anger, dignity over retaliation, that's where real strength lies." The woman nodded again, and after a brief pause, walked away. The man continued sitting on the bench, reflecting on the interaction. He realized that his response had already begun to influence people, even in small ways. Observing and engaging thoughtfully could create ripples that reached far beyond a single street corner. Meanwhile, the woman who had attacked him struggled through the day. She went to work, but her mind kept returning to the confrontation. Each time she remembered it, she felt a mix of frustration and shame. She thought about the way he had stood his ground without aggression, and it unsettled her. She'd assumed she held power in the moment, but her understanding of control had been completely wrong. She tried to distract herself with work, but nothing could erase the image of his calm, unwavering gaze and measured response. By midday, news outlets and local blogs had picked up the story. The video, which had started as a brief clip recorded by a bystander, was now everywhere. People debated what had happened, some discussing the woman's aggression, others praising the man's calm response. Social media posts analyzed the interaction in detail, highlighting how unusual it was to see someone respond to hatred with composure rather than anger. The man did not seek attention or recognition, but he could not avoid it entirely. People stopped him in the streets, asking for brief comments, expressing admiration, or simply acknowledging him with a nod. He responded politely, never boastful, always calm. He understood that the story had taken on a life of its own, and he was now part of a larger conversation about courage, dignity, and respect. In the evening, he returned to his apartment, reflecting on the day's events. The confrontation, the attention, the discussions online, they were all part of a larger picture. He thought about the woman, about the bystanders, and about himself. He realized that the encounter had taught lessons not just to him, but to everyone who had witnessed it or heard about it. Strength, he understood, was often quiet. It did not need to be loud or aggressive. It was in restraint, in calm, in the choice to act with dignity, even when provoked. The woman, by contrast, faced growing consequences. Messages and comments criticizing her behavior continued to arrive, some from people she knew, many from strangers. At work, colleagues had heard about the incident and were quietly discussing it. Her anger, which had felt justified yesterday, was now met with judgment and disappointment. She could no longer ignore the impact of her actions, and a sense of accountability began to take root, whether she wanted it or not. The man thought about how society often reacts to aggression. People assume that violence or anger is the answer, that responding in kind is the natural choice. But the incident had shown another possibility. Calm, measured, and thoughtful responses could change the outcome, influence others, and even teach lessons to those who had tried to cause harm. He felt a sense of quiet pride, not because he had been in a confrontation, but because he had chosen a path that reflected his values. As night fell, he looked out his window at the city lights, reflecting on the day. The streets he had walked earlier were now quiet, the hum of the city softer, calmer. He thought about the lessons of courage, patience, and dignity. The encounter had been brief, intense, and unexpected, but it had left a lasting mark on him and others. It was a reminder that the choices made in difficult moments could define a person far more than the actions of those who sought to provoke them. The woman, alone in her apartment, replayed the incident in her mind once more. She could not escape the feeling that she had misjudged the situation. She had assumed that aggression would assert control, but in reality, it had exposed her own weaknesses. The man's calm response had revealed the emptiness of her anger and the importance of restraint, leaving her with an uncomfortable but necessary reflection on her own behavior. For the man, the day ended with a quiet sense of resolution. He knew the story would continue to spread, discussions would continue online, people would continue to talk about what had happened. But he also knew that he had acted in a way that was true to his principles. He had faced aggression with calm, strength, and dignity, and in doing so, he had set an example for everyone who had witnessed the moment, even as sleep approached. His mind remained focused on the lessons of the day. He understood that life would continue to present challenges, that aggression and hatred were realities people faced, but also that choices mattered. Choosing dignity over anger, restraint over retaliation, and calm over fear, these choices were what defined character, what inspired others, and what created ripples of change in a world that often seemed chaotic. And as the city quieted down for the night, the man felt a quiet sense of peace. The confrontation was over, but its impact would continue. The lessons of courage, dignity, and integrity were now part of the community's consciousness, and in that, he found reassurance that one person's choice to respond with strength and composure could leave a lasting mark far beyond a single street corner. The next morning, the man woke early, as he usually did. The city was quiet, still rubbing the sleep from its streets, yet the echoes of the previous days lingered in his mind. He made tea, poured it into his favorite mug, and sat by the window, looking out at the slow awakening of the city. Street cleaners moved methodically along the sidewalks. Vendors began setting up their carts, and joggers passed by in rhythmic steps. Life was continuing, steady and unbothered by the events that had stirred so much attention, yet he knew that the city had changed in subtle ways because of what had happened. He thought back to the woman. Yesterday, she had left the scene angry, confused, and unable to process what had just occurred. Her actions had been aggressive, fueled by prejudice and a sense of entitlement. But his calm response had unsettled her in ways he hadn't intended, though he understood its effect. He had never sought to shame her. His goal had only been to protect himself and maintain his dignity. Yet he was aware that the ripple of his actions could bring reflection, even for someone as obstinate as she appeared. Meanwhile, the woman sat alone in her apartment, the morning sunlight falling harshly across her living room. She had barely slept, her mind replaying the incident over and over. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw his calm, steady gaze, the quiet strength that had defied her aggression. For the first time in a long time, she felt the full weight of her own actions. Anger that once felt justified now seemed hollow. Words she had spoken in fury seemed cruel and unnecessary. Her hand shook slightly as she recalled how easily her emotions had taken control, and she realized that she had underestimated someone she had assumed would be afraid or submissive. She had thought aggression was power, but she now understood that true strength was not in striking others or instilling fear. Strength was in composure, in standing tall when faced with hostility, and in responding without hatred. Her mind struggled to reconcile this idea with the person she had believed herself to be. She had never confronted the consequences of her actions so directly, and the realization made her uncomfortable, perhaps even afraid. As the man prepared to leave his apartment, he decided to walk through the streets once more. He wanted to observe the city, to witness how people were reacting, and to feel the pulse of life that had not stopped despite the drama that had unfolded. Children were playing in the streets, their laughter mixing with the hum of morning traffic. Vendors called out cheerfully, greeting regular customers. Even in the normal rhythm of life, he could see how people were thinking differently, noticing small details. Reflecting quietly on the meaning of respect and confrontation, he walked past the cafe where the encounter had started to receive attention, though indirectly. A few baristas nodded at him, acknowledging the courage he had displayed without needing to say a word. Some customers recognized him from the video, offering quiet smiles or polite greetings. The man appreciated these gestures, but he never allowed them to distract him. He was aware that attention could easily inflate pride, and he wanted to remain grounded, focused on what mattered: principles, dignity, and reflection at the same time. The woman was slowly trying to face the reality of her behavior. She went outside for a brief walk, attempting to feel normal again. Yet, with every glance from strangers, every whispered comment, she felt the echoes of her actions following her. People did not know her personally, but the story of the previous day had spread quickly. Her aggression had been public, and its consequences were unavoidable. She began to understand that actions fueled by hatred could not easily be hidden. They would follow her, not just online, but in the subtle judgments of society. Her thoughts kept returning to him: his calm, unwavering demeanor, the way he had stood his ground without raising his hand in anger. It unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. She realized that her assumptions about control and power had been entirely wrong. She had thought that by striking him, she would assert authority, but in reality, she had revealed vulnerability, ignorance, and fear. For the first time, she felt a need to consider someone else's perspective too, understand what it meant to face aggression and respond with integrity. The man, meanwhile, continued walking through quieter neighborhoods, taking time to observe everyday life. He noticed neighbors greeting each other, sharing small smiles, and exchanging pleasantries. These ordinary interactions reminded him that human connection was built on respect, patience, and understanding. Confrontations, even when harsh, were part of life. but the way people responded to them could shape their character far more than the confrontation itself. He stopped by a small park where a few elderly men were playing chess on a worn table. They paused their game as he approached, nodding politely. One of them spoke up, commenting on the story that had circulated. "You handled yourself well," he said, his voice steady and approving. "It's not easy to stay calm when someone is trying to provoke you. Many would have lost their temper immediately." The man nodded in acknowledgement. "I believe it's important to control our actions, especially when faced with aggression. The way we respond reflects who we are, not the one who tries to hurt us." The older man smiled, and the others nodded in agreement. Their words carried wisdom, and the man felt a quiet sense of affirmation. He realized that courage and dignity were qualities that transcended age, background, and circumstance. They were universal human values that could influence everyone who witnessed them. The woman, back in her apartment, made an effort to confront her own behavior more deeply. She thought about her upbringing, her experiences, and the prejudices she had absorbed without question. For years, she had acted in ways that were aggressive or dismissive toward those she saw as different. But now, confronted with someone who did not conform to her assumptions, she felt a jolt of clarity. Her aggression had been misguided, a reflection of fear rather than true strength. She began to write in a journal, attempting to process her thoughts. She wrote about the incident, about the man, and about the feelings it had stirred within her. Writing forced her to slow down, to reflect, and to confront uncomfortable truths. She realized that her anger had been a mask for insecurity, and that real strength, like the man had shown, was calm, measured, and rooted in dignity. Meanwhile, the man continued through the city, passing through streets he had walked countless times before. But everything felt slightly different now. People's reactions, even in subtle ways, reminded him of the broader impact of human behavior. Witnessing or being part of an incident could leave lasting impressions, shape opinions, and influence values. He thought about the importance of modeling integrity, of acting in ways that inspire rather than intimidate. Later in the afternoon, he returned to a small bookstore he enjoyed visiting. The shop was quiet, filled with the faint smell of old paper and polished wood. The owner greeted him warmly, aware of the story but treating him as an ordinary customer. He browsed through books, appreciating the calmness of the environment. It was a contrast to the chaos of the streets, and he relished the opportunity to reflect, think, and simply be present without distraction. The woman, meanwhile, attempted to leave her apartment again. This time, she chose to walk through a different route, passing people she had ignored before. She noticed the kindness in small gestures, the way a neighbor held a door open, the way a passerby smiled at a child, the quiet patience of people waiting at a crosswalk. For the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of humility. She realized that her actions yesterday had contrasted sharply with these everyday acts of grace and respect. She continued her walk, thinking about how she might respond differently in the future. She knew it would not be easy to change habits and attitudes that had been ingrained over years, but the memory of the man's composure gave her a model to strive toward. Strength, she understood now, was not in causing fear or asserting dominance. It was in patience, dignity, and respect. The man, walking home as evening approached, reflected on the lessons of the day. Life was unpredictable, filled with moments that tested patience, courage, and integrity. But it was in these moments that character was revealed. He had faced aggression, public attention, and judgment, yet he had maintained calm and dignity throughout. That calmness had influenced not just the woman, but the bystanders, the community, and even strangers who witnessed the incident online. As night fell, the city lights twinkled, casting reflections on wet streets and shimmering windows. The man returned to his apartment, quietly preparing for the next day. He thought about courage, about the way people reacted to aggression, and about the subtle but powerful impact of dignity. The confrontation was over, but its lessons continued to unfold, not just for him, but for the woman, for bystanders, and for anyone who witnessed or heard about it. The woman, alone in her apartment, finally sat down to consider the future. She knew that she could not undo her actions, but she could choose how to act going forward. The incident had shaken her, not out of fear of punishment, but because it had revealed something about herself she could no longer ignore. She had been aggressive, prejudiced, and unaware. And now she realized that change required reflection, humility, and conscious effort. For the man, the day ended with a quiet sense of fulfillment. The city outside settled into its nighttime rhythm, but the lessons of courage, restraint, and dignity remained vivid. He understood that life would continue to present challenges, yet each challenge was an opportunity to act with integrity. And in every interaction, every glance, every choice, he could influence the world around him not through anger or force, but through calm, measured, and thoughtful action. The following morning, the city's streets were alive again, with the usual energy vendors calling out, people hurrying to work, children laughing as they ran to school. Yet for the man, there was a subtle difference in the air. The city felt more aware somehow, as if the previous confrontation had left a quiet but lasting mark. People were moving carefully, their expressions a little softer, a little more thoughtful. He noticed small gestures of kindness that had gone unnoticed before. A young man helping an elderly woman across the street, a neighbor returning a dropped grocery bag, a group of children sharing their toys. He walked through the streets calmly, observing the rhythms of life. Each interaction reminded him of the importance of patience, respect, and understanding. Yesterday's confrontation, intense as it had been, now seemed like a distant lesson that had unfolded in real time. He knew it would continue to influence those who had seen it, not only the woman who had attacked him, but also the bystanders, the online viewers, and anyone who had heard about it. Its moments of courage, integrity, and calm could ripple outward, in ways that were hard to measure, yet undeniably powerful. The woman, on the other hand, was beginning to face the full weight of her actions. The video had gone viral, drawing attention from not only her neighborhood, but also people from other cities. Comments, messages, and conversations were happening. Everywhere, many condemning her behavior, some offering insights into what she could learn. She felt the sting of accountability now in ways she had not experienced before. There was no hiding, no avoidance. Her actions were public, and she could no longer deny the impact they had on others. She spent the morning reflecting quietly. Sitting by her window and writing down thoughts in a journal, she admitted to herself the aggression, prejudice, and ignorance that had fueled her attack. She also acknowledged the strength, calm, and dignity the man had shown in response. It was difficult to write these things, harder still to accept them fully, but she knew it was necessary. Reflection, she realized, was the first step toward change. Meanwhile, the man walked past the cafe where he had once paused to drink coffee and reflect. The baristas waved at him, recognizing his quiet presence. Some customers who had heard of the incident approached him again, wanting to speak briefly. "I've been thinking about what you did," one said softly. "It's rare to see someone stay so calm. I've tried to do it before, but I lose control too quickly." The man nodded, keeping his expression gentle. "It takes practice and awareness," he said. "Anger and fear are natural, but they do not need to control our actions. Each moment is a choice, and the choices we make define us more than the actions of others." The customer smiled thoughtfully, clearly taking his words to heart. The man continued on his walk, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment. It wasn't about recognition or praise, it was about knowing that actions, rooted in dignity and composure, had meaning beyond the immediate moment. They had the power to inspire, teach, and remind people of the importance of character in the midst of chaos. The woman left her apartment later in the day, choosing to walk through quieter streets, reflecting on how to conduct herself differently in the future. She noticed the small gestures of kindness she had ignored before, and felt a deep sense of humility. The lesson of the previous confrontation had sunk in. Aggression and hatred only reveal weakness, while composure, respect, and self-control reflect true strength. As she walked, she observed people helping one another, smiling and interacting with patience. These ordinary acts of human decency contrasted sharply with her own behavior the day before. She realized that the man's response had demonstrated an example far beyond what she could have imagined. It was not force but calm dignity that commanded respect and admiration. Her heart sank a little, realizing that she had a long way to go to align her behavior with these principles. Back at his apartment, the man took a few moments to reflect on the events of the past days. The confrontation, the public attention, and the lessons that had emerged, they were all part of a larger understanding of life and human behavior. Confrontation was inevitable at times, but the way one responded to it could shape not only their own character, but also influence the community around them. He felt a quiet satisfaction, not in the attention, but in the knowledge that he had remained true to his values and had created a ripple of positive influence. Throughout the day, the man continued to encounter people who had been affected by the incident in some way. Some expressed admiration, others curiosity, and a few admitted that witnessing his calm response had made them rethink how they would respond in moments of aggression. These small interactions reinforced his belief that strength was often quiet, measured, and rooted in integrity. It did not need to be loud or aggressive to leave an impact. The woman, facing a growing sense of accountability, made her way to a nearby bookstore. She had always enjoyed reading, but this time she sought something deeper, guidance on self-reflection, humility, and understanding human behavior. She browsed through shelves quietly, selecting a few books that could help her confront her own flaws and learn to act with integrity. She realized that change required deliberate effort and self-awareness, that lessons were sometimes painful but necessary. By evening, the man found himself in a quiet park, observing families, friends, and children as they moved through the space. The world continued its rhythms, but he understood that even small moments could carry meaning. A kind word, a calm response, a thoughtful gesture, these could leave ripples far beyond what one could immediately see. He reflected on the incident as a reminder that life was filled with challenges, and each challenge offered an opportunity to demonstrate character, courage, and dignity. The woman walked past the same park later, noticing the scene. For the first time, she observed life without judgment or self-interest. She saw people helping each other, sharing smiles, and treating one another with patience. She thought about her own behavior, contrasting it with the calm strength she had witnessed. She felt a sense of shame. Yes, but also a spark of hope or recognition that change was possible, that she could choose differently next time. As night fell, the city lights reflected on wet streets from a brief evening drizzle. The man returned to his apartment, reflecting quietly on the past events. He understood that confrontation and aggression were inevitable parts of life. But the true measure of a person was not in how they were treated, but how they chose to respond. His calm, measured actions had influenced others, bystanders, online viewers, and even the woman who had attacked him. That understanding brought him a quiet sense of peace. The woman, sitting by her window, continued to reflect. She had taken a first step toward understanding her behavior, toward humility, and toward a new way of interacting with the world. She realized that aggression was easy, restraint was hard, respect required conscious effort, but it was far more powerful than any momentary display of anger. She resolved, quietly but firmly, to act differently in the future, to let calmness guide her choices rather than fear or prejudice. In the days that followed, the story continued to circulate online and in the community. People debated, discussed, and reflected on what had happened. Some focused on the aggression and the wrongdoing of the woman, others focused on the courage and composure of the man. What became clear to most was that moments of tension revealed the true character of individuals. The man's choice to respond with dignity rather than anger had left an impression far stronger than the aggression itself. He went about his days, normally, walking through the city, observing life, and quietly reflecting on human behavior. He remained humble, aware that attention could inflate pride, and conscious that the real lesson was not in recognition, but in living with integrity every day. The woman, meanwhile, continued to confront her own behavior, slowly making changes. In the way she interacted with others, learning lessons she had previously ignored. Over time, the incident became less of a sensational story and more of a quiet lesson for those who had witnessed it or heard about it. People remembered not only the aggression, but the way it was met with calm, dignity, and courage. The man had set an example, demonstrating that strength, was not about dominance, but about self-control, respect, and the courage to stand tall, even when provoked. The woman, too, began to understand that life offered second chances, but only if one was willing to reflect, learn, and change. Her actions had consequences, but they also provided an opportunity to grow. She carried the memory of that day with her, using it as a reminder of what not to do, and what she aspired to become: a person capable of restraint, reflection, and respect. As the city moved on, the man walked through the streets one final time in reflection. Children played, neighbors greeted one another, and life continued in its rhythm. But beneath the normalcy, there was a quiet recognition of the lessons learned. Courage was not in striking back, but in standing tall. Strength was not in aggression, but in composure. And dignity was not earned through fear, but through the choices one made in moments of trial. The story ended not with loud confrontation, but with quiet resolution. The man had faced aggression, maintained his principles, and influenced others through calm and integrity. The woman had confronted her own flaws and begun a journey toward change. And the city, like life itself, moved forward with a little more awareness, a little more reflection, and a deeper understanding of what it meant to act with strength, courage, and dignity. In the end, it was not about the attack, the video, or the viral attention. It was about the choices made in the face of challenge, the calmness that diffused hatred, and the quiet power of integrity. These were the lessons that would linger far longer than any moment of anger, shaping lives, influencing behavior, and reminding everyone that true strength is found not in aggression, but in the courage to respond with dignity and respect